welcome today's seminar speaker, Dr. Katie Irving from the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCWRP for short. So I know Katie from way back when, like pre-pandemic, when she was a PhD student in the same lab as I was at the Leibniz Institute for Freshwater Ecology and the Freie Universität in Berlin, Germany. And we shared an office space and also we ate lunch together a lot. And so for her PhD, Sarah developed these aquatic macroinvertebrate species distribution models and was investigating the associated environmental and hydrological optima. And after her PhD, Katie joined SCWRP, and her research there is focused on Southern California stream restoration and stream management through flow ecology models. And she's investigating how these changes in hydrology impact the biological assemblages within them. And with that, I'd love to welcome Dr. Katie Irving. Yay.
Thank you. Very nice introduction. And I can't believe that was 5 years ago, Angelica, and that's awful. Take 2 years off because of COVID, right? It's only 3 years. Okay, so yeah, first of all, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to come here and talk about my research with you. So just to give you an outline of what I'm going to be going on about. So first of all, I'm going to give you a background about me, my research focus and background, tell you a bit about SCWRP, who we are, talk about eco-hydrology and what kind of questions we need to ask concerning management of that. Also going beyond eco-hydrology, it's not all about flow. And then future work, future hopes and dreams. And then I'll talk about some potential collaborations with you guys. And then I want to spend the last sort of few minutes telling you about what I've learned working in applied research. I think that would be very beneficial to you, especially if you're grad students, because it is very different. So my research focus is basically using predictive modeling to answer this overall question. So how well are we protecting our systems over space and over time? I was advising my first couple of years at SCWRP to get a mission statement, and I would advise you all do it. It's really, really helpful because you can keep kind of focused and grounded on what you want to do. So mine is identify and investigate the most critical stresses driving species success and predict how changing conditions will impact ecological communities in the future and across systems. So in terms of using species models to inform management, the way that works is that the benchmarks that we use for assessment are based on beneficial uses. I don't know if you have the same thing here, but they're state policy and they're basically ecosystem services, but they're regulated. And any kind of ecology or aquatic ecology related beneficial use is based on whether the species is there or not, or the habitat is there or not. So then the models can relate the species occurrence to flow alteration or to other stresses. So this is just a very kind of straightforward figure of what that would look like. So we have a probability of occurrence as a function of flow. So yeah, so when Angelica invited me, she did ask me to give a background of my journey to SCWRP. So I'm going to show you geographically, which may be more interesting for me than it is for you, but there we go. You get some European geography in here too. So this is where I'm from. It's the north of England. It's the Lake District. It's on the border of Scotland. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, very beautiful. And someplace, it's so beautiful, I didn't appreciate it until after I left. It tends to happen. I did my undergrad at the University of Plymouth on the south coast of England. And I did marine biology there. And actually, I have a fun fact. So there are many, there's a university there, and there are many different marine science institutes. It's also the home of the Royal Navy. So the fun fact is that there are more marine biologists in Plymouth per square meter than anywhere else in the world. So I didn't stay there long. After my undergrad, I actually did an internship in Greece. at the Archipelagos Institute of Marine Conservation, and that's where I studied microplastics in fish. I lived on a small island in Samos, which is close to Turkey, and that's where Pythagoras was from. So it's all about the triangles over there. So then I went back to the UK and studied at Queen Mary University of London. That's when I went over from marine to the freshwater side, because I did freshwater and marine ecology there. I'm trying to think of a fun fact of Queen Mary now, because I had to. I don't know if there's any metal fans here, but the singer from Iron Maiden, Bruce Dickinson, has an honorary doctorate from this university. Okay. So then straight after my master's, I then went to Berlin to IGB, and that's where I started really with the modeling side of everything. So that's where basically I've really honed my skills, is in a small office in Berlin, nowhere near a river. So then I got my doctorate in 2019, and then I went all the way to Southern California and joined SWRP. And that's why I'm here today, I guess. So, who are SWRP? So, we're a public agency. We were established in 1969. We just had our 50th anniversary, which is pretty old for the US. We're a joint powers authority, which basically means we have member agencies that pay a subscription. We have a commission, and the people on the commission represent the different agencies involved with us. So that can be regulators and also the regulated. So people like the Water Board and the EPA, as well as sanitation districts and stormwater agencies and things like that. And the overall aim of SWRP is to understand the impact of human activities on the environment, but also how to manage for that and what to do about it. So we have 8 different research themes. I mostly work in ecohydrology. That's where I was. That's what I was employed for. But because my skills in modeling is so transferable, I'm actually able to work in all these different themes, which is pretty cool, because I get to work with lots of different people and lots of different species and lots of different problems, which is pretty nice. So I've just got 2 left to kind of conquer, I think. Okay, so that was all about me, and now I'm going to go into kind of ecohydrology and what we actually ask and what we do to inform management. So there are many competing water demands, especially in Southern California. There's lots of droughts and lots of water problems. And I was talking about this earlier, every single raindrop, every drop of water in California, someone has a right to. So it's very, very political as well. And all of these issues produce their own problems, and they basically affect each other. So there's like stream flow diversion, discharge of stormwater and capture of stormwater, wastewater discharge. And also, like, what I care about mostly is protecting healthy water bodies. And then, on top of that, then we have problems with climate change. So we've really got to kind of protect and manage our streams. Also, in altered hydrology is actually the biggest risk factor in Southern California, associated with poor biological conditions. So it's really something that we have to hone in on and really manage for that. So how have we done so far? This is kind of a really big thing that's happened in California in the past sort of decade, is the development of the California Environmental Flows Framework. And this is a multi-agency working group. It's a framework that basically links the function of California streams to environmental flows. And that's the environmental functions is kind of what you can see in this makeshift hydrograph here. So these different peaks and the different places within the hydrograph are showing the different biological functions that supports. And this was finalized back in 2021. It was actually almost finished by the time I started, but now we're working on implementing this into the actual streams. But it's doing pretty well. It's pretty well respected. It's actually been adopted by our state agencies and regulators. So they've actually used these frameworks for a few different things. So, for example, CDFW, they run an in-stream flows program that's a big part of, and also the State Water Board's cannabis cultivation policy. So So the big foundation of CEF, as we call it, California Water Environmental Flows Framework, is the functional flow metrics. And what these do is they're basically metrics that quantify seasonal flow components. And you can kind of see that in the hydrograph here. These are the different flow components. So like wet season base flow, spring recession flow, dry season base flows or summer flows. They've all been recognized as supporting key functions in California streams. And each of these flow components have individual metrics. So like magnitude, timing, duration, frequency, that kind of thing of flow events, and they're the individual metrics. So I'm actually going to talk about these metrics quite a lot. They come up. This is basically the flow metrics that I always use in the models. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how we implement CEF. So this is the Yellow River. I don't know if you've seen that before. Isn't it lovely? So yeah, that's basically what we're working with, but some of it looks nice, though. It's not. Okay, so there are several management questions that we've been asked that are related to eco-hydrology. And here are some of them. So basically, what are the impacts to beneficial uses caused by reducing effluent discharge? Where, like geographically, should flow management and restoration be prioritized? Also, how vulnerable are streams to flow alteration, basically? And this is what we have to provide to answer those questions. So we need to prioritize the flow metrics, develop flow limits. We need to produce maps of species suitability. And we need to see kind of the response of species to future or changed flows under different management scenarios. So that's where I come in. So I build the flow ecology models that relate the flow alteration to stream biota. And I have no preferences over what species I model. We do benefit communities, amphibians, fish, also riparian habitat for endangered bird species. So we've prioritized metrics on benefit communities based on the relationship of the flow alteration to biology. So we use our stream condition indices, which we have the California Stream Condition Index, the CSCI, which is based on macroinvertebrates. There's an LV equivalent, which is the ASCII. And basically taking data from these indices across Southern California, we relate that, I can relate that using a boosted regression tree to the flow metrics. And then we can look at kind of how important each of these metrics are to each of these communities. So in this particular example, peak flow is the most important. I think it was for both of them. But also like spring recession and wet season base flow are really important for these communities. So we're going to hone in on those metrics, basically. So then we can, if we're honing in on those metrics, we can relate the flow alteration to the benefit community. Basically, these are all bioassessment sites, all these black dots here. This is San Diego County. It's blue because this is the study area of this particular project. So each one of these sites has an index score associated with it. And then we can relate those to the altered flow using a logistic regression. And that's what you see here. So on the Y, there's a probability of achieving a good score. And then on the X is our measure of flow alteration, which is the difference in flow metric from a kind of reference or baseline to current conditions. So that's why it's like negative. So these flows are actually depleted to what they should be. They're less than what they should be. So then using this model, we can then get the flow limits. So this is basically pretty much the same model, but it has the augmented side on as well. So we start with a threshold of risk. An important thing to say about kind of our probability thresholds and risk thresholds and things like that, we don't decide these are a management decision. We can recommend things and say, don't go below 0.25 or something like that, but that's a regulator choice. But anyway, we can see where this risk threshold has what the associated flow alteration is for this risk threshold, and then we have a lower and an upper limit, and that gives us the flow limits. So then we can see kind of which seasons we need to focus on, and that's through the flow metrics, but also what direction the flow needs to go in. So is it too high or is it too low? So that's how we've kind of answered questions to do with the community at the community level, but managers are also regulated and they care about individual species, especially when they're endangered or protected or anything like that. And one of those endangered species is the arroyo toad. And so to look at the vulnerability of arroyo toad to flow alteration, I built a species distribution model. And this is, I don't know if you're familiar with how they work, but this is basically conceptually what it looks like. So it takes the known occurrences of the toad and relates it to the landscape variables as well as flow. And puts it through a random forest, which is a machine learning technique. And through that predicts the probability of occurrence, first through in current conditions, and then in any future or change to flow conditions. The difference between those two then is how vulnerable the species is to flow alteration. So out of that, we get a map of predicted probability or suitability for the toad. And the great thing about these models is, so the ones on the benefit community were like individual metrics, flow metrics. This incorporates all different kinds of important metrics. So like substrate's really important, like the percent of clay or sand. And also other landscape characteristics are really important for this species. We can also look at how important each of the flow metrics are compared to the other predictors. And we can compare the outcome to future changes in flow. But now one challenge is that we found with this is how to set limits from an SDM. So you can get basically this kind of curve here, which is the probability of occurrence for each of the different predictor variables. It's called a partial dependence plot. The issue is that it assumes all other metrics stay the same when it plots this figure. So in reality, we can't really say that that's going to happen. You know, if one of them changes, another one is going to change, especially when you're talking about climate variables and flow variables and things. It's not an isolated thing. So instead of actually giving a value, what we did was give general guidance for the arroyo toad. The managers seemed pretty happy with it, so we went with it. But so, for example, if you're looking at peak flow at the 5-year flood, it tended to be depleted in this system. So if they increase that peak flow, that would increase the probability of occurrence. And that's to do with like scouring and everything to get new habitat each year. But if anyone thinks that I can use these partial dependent plots to set limits, please let me know. I'm all ears. Okay, so so managers obviously care about individual species, but they also care about species that have existed historically. A lot of species have been locally extinct in Southern California. But that basically means we don't have current data to model with the current conditions. And as we have historical data for physically, but we don't have that. So we basically need to find another way to do it. And we do that using this kind of approach that we call a hybrid SDM. So I'm just going to give you like the kind of the difference between a statistical and a hybrid model, just so you kind of get the gist of how they're different. So a statistical SDM is basically the direct statistical correlation between flow or whatever physical variable and the known occurrence of the species. So that's like the X in the map there. So it's very spatial based. It's just based on geographical locations and statistical correlations. However, the hybrid models is basically a separate model for each of the life stage, each of the species and the physical variable. So as the example here, so this, I think it's willow seedling mortality in response to depth. So this is basically the hybrid models are more response-based rather than statistical. So it gives you that a bit more of a causal information within the model. So then how we use those is we basically develop a bunch of them. There's various species and life stages, various different physical stresses on the x-axis too. Now we use hydraulics because we're looking at flow mostly, but it could be anything if it's something you want to do. Now it's all collated from the literature because we don't have that data within the study area. So it also needs to be kind of a similar system. So it helps you have a local well-studied species that you're looking at, because otherwise you're a bit screwed. But each of these different curves has a varied response depending on the data and the modeling approach. So there's probability of occurrence, sealing survival, relative biomass, and that kind of thing. And then using hydraulic modeling, we can then convert each of these curves into a probability of occurrence as a function of flow. And that gives us site-specific flow requirements for multiple different species. And this is taken from our Shiny app. This is actually the LA River. But it's showing basically different species along the bottom. Also showing, we can see where the flow limits, sorry. It's showing the flow limits, you can see the CFS, I don't know if you can see that, but it's showing a CFS there. And we can see where each of these kind of flow requirements overlap. And also we can see what season is important. So on the top here, it's showing dry season base flow, wet season base flow, which is go back to the flow metrics, and then we can focus on each of the different seasons. And then we can use that to basically relate that to the amount of flow that's reduced. So in this example, this is showing the probability of occurrence. And then from here, this is a baseline reclamation plant discharge. And this is reducing as it goes down. So you can see the probability of occurrence is also reducing with the reduction in discharge. Then again, we can use a probability threshold, again, chosen by management, not by us. So they can have a look and see what kind of leeway they have within each of the seasons. So obviously there's more water in winter because it rains. So there's a bit more leeway to reduce discharge in the winter. Probably not the summer though. So how are managers actually using our work? So they use it in kind of several different ways. So in South Orange County, they've used our prioritization. This is taken from the benefit community analysis I showed you. So all of the red areas have basically been prioritized for restoration. And we're actually awaiting funding plan to install the restoration and green infrastructure in those areas. And then Los Angeles City have applied our framework. So this is the flow limits on the hybrid models. Any reclamation plant that wants to reduce their discharge has to apply for a permit, and they have to use that framework. Also, San Diego County, so this was the TOAD model, and some other models as well, I should say. But that was an implementation of a risk decision framework. So anytime there's a new project that affects the stream, any kind of water related project, that has to go through this risk decision framework to get that permit. And then the next phase of that is to include climate change, which we haven't included yet, but we're working on it. Okay. So now I'm going to go kind of beyond eco-hydrology, because it is more than just flow. Although, we've done a lot with flow, we're definitely not done, but there are additional challenges that we need to include. And this is then what we plan to kind of investigate in the future. So this is kind of the roadmap leading forward. So temperature contaminants moving to the estuaries and the coastal area, and also BMPs, best management practices. We've done a bit here. So I'm going to take you through kind of very briefly what we've done in this department. So starting with stream temperature, that's the San Gabriel River. That's the bridge to nowhere. You can bungee off it. You want. I've never done it. Looks cool though. So basically LA County or the water boards have implemented a new temperature objective in LA County. They've reduced it from 86 degrees to 80 degrees. There's not much scientific basis behind it. So it's basically our job to kind of figure that bit out for them. So basically they need to be able to define what the temperature limit means, how to reach the compliance, but also they need to figure out how much temperature is actually influencing the ecological communities. But basically how to measure temperature. Because at the moment it's just a spot temperature, which if you know anything about temperature, that's just not good. That depends on the time of day, time of year, all kinds of things. So we've looked at the first two. The third is a whole kind of another multiple stressor project, which is in the pipeline, but haven't touched that yet. So what I needed to do was basically find the best biological and temperature metrics. So I did a lot of exploratory analysis and modeling, again, using the benefit community to test out kind of different biological metrics. So we used like the CSCI as well, if you remember the condition index, but we also looked at things like, this is EPT, taxa, percent of intolerant species, shredder taxa. So it has like the functional trait side of it to see what gives us like the strongest relationship. And then also we used kind of model temperature data to see what kind of temperature metric was the most important. And that's using the boosted regression trees like we did kind of earlier for the flow ecology models. So then basically we did pretty much the same thing as we did with the flow ecology curves, but just substituted flow for temperature. So these are the green dots of the bioassessment sites here. This is the kind of stream network is a model temperature data. It's a bit limited, but it's all we have. If you think flow data, it's hard to find. Temperature data is just so bad. But then basically we built these curves that show the probability of achieving a good CSCI with we discovered that the 7-day maximum temperature was actually the best one to use in this case, especially as we're looking at kind of what the maximum temperature should be in the stream. So they would use this temperature limit and they would measure temperature using a 7-day max metric from continuous data. Something else we did here was, so the CSCI has a standard threshold of like good and bad biology. I know it's not as straightforward as that in real life, but that's what we have, which is 0.79. But in these streams, they're so highly modified that that's really fighting a losing battle. You're trying to get that like 0.79, so we reduced it to a modified threshold of 0.6. So the management was pretty happy about it. Okay. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about how we're including contaminants. This is me actually going back to the marine side, which is quite nice. That hasn't happened for a while. So basically, this is a multiple stressor study looking at trying to figure out how do microplastics and domoic acid impact population. And this is a really cool collaboration with our toxicology department. Because we want to see like if the response of a cell or an individual to a toxin, what does that actually mean for the population or the wider community? And we did that by coupling the kind of toxicology data or the exposure dose relationship to a kind of population model. And this is just kind of a basic matrix population model. And we did it on bivalve populations on the coast. And the way that we brought them together was using a Bayesian belief network. So how this works is, so each one of these boxes is a stressor or an external factor or a vital rate to do with the population and its physical surroundings. So there's microplastic concentration is way at the top there. Sorry if these are small. And then we also added in like sea surface temperature and air temperature and things like that, because they're all going to affect the population. And how it works is you basically take these vital rates from the toxicology model and use it as input into the population model to see how much that changes the population growth rate, or whether there's a decline or not. Now, this doesn't cover anything. This is kind of in quite early stages. This is the first draft of the model. But we want to add in kind of several other stresses that we know are going to be important, like wastewater input, stormwater, domoic acid, food availability, wave action, submergence, and things like that. So that's the plan moving forward there. And how they would use this is basically, it's a stressor prioritization tool. So here is showing the probability of the stressor occurring and the probability of an effect. So don't kind of take this too seriously because it's got a lot of made up data in it, but you kind of see the end product is going to look like this. But this is basically showing that air temperature and sea surface temperature are going to have the most effect overall, which kind of makes sense, to be fair. But it helps the management kind of prioritize their actions so they know what to focus on. How am I doing for time? Am I good? Okay. Okay, so moving forward to kind of models of the future, which if you Google models of the future, that's the exact picture you get. So there we go. Try it now. Yeah, these are just like kind of ideas we want going forward. Some have started, some haven't. So the first one is, well, this is kind of a big one. So our current models are relating flow to biology. You know, like this curve, if you remember this one. But it's a lot more complicated than that. You know, flow is going to impact physical habitat, stream temperature. So we really want to understand how flow is mediating or being mediated by all these different factors. Because then once we have an outcome on the biology, we can really figure out what's actually causing the problem. Then we might have alternatives to flow management in those areas. And also for restoration, we want to make sure we're doing the right kind of restoration or infrastructure. So basically, we need to build more integrated models to help prioritize what to focus on. So we want that with multiple stresses and multiple species in multiple systems as well, and multiple management problems. Also, anything that happens upstream is going to impact downstream. So it's really important, something we really want to do is to look at environmental flow impacts to estuaries, because the amount of fresh water that comes down is going to kind of impact everything. And I've spoken to a few people about this today. The biggest barrier to this is that no one actually takes ownership of the estuary. It's like, it's not the stormwater people, it's not the inland people, the stream people, it's not the marine people. So until someone takes ownership, we're kind of stuck in this hole, but it seems to be kind of gathering momentum at the moment, which is cool. And also, yeah, so best management practices or BMPs. So not sure if you know much about these. So these are basically, they capture stormwater. So that would be the inflow coming in, and then it filters it and through vegetation and media and goes off into the groundwater or reservoir. These are very terrestrial, but they're a way of managing stormwater. And they are developed by engineers. They're built for flow. They hope for the best for water quality, but it's all, yeah, but it's all monitored. But what I'm going to look at is how they're actually using the vegetation. They all have vegetation, but engineers don't know what vegetation is going to be the best. So we need to really figure out kind of, is it actually supporting habitat? Is it increasing biodiversity? And is it connected to perhaps other rain gardens or other like natural habitats? Because that's when it's actually going to really make a difference. So anyone interested in that, let me know. Okay, so these are just a few ideas I had when I was putting together these slides of what potential collaborations could come of this. And I think, well, at least it kind of fuels discussion. So first of all, this is a big one, but integrating multiple stressor and multiple species into flow ecology models, that's not just one project, that's loads of projects. So if there are any kind of stressors that you're particularly interested in or species you're interested in, we can have a chat about that. Also, stressor population models over time. Angelica? So this is kind of trying to get, like, our models are quite static in time. So getting that variability over time is important, and also getting more of a mechanistic understanding of what is going on in the system is kind of covered in this potential project. Other things that we want to consider in flow ecology models is life history and trait-based approaches. I think they have great potential. I've dabbled in it, but it just hasn't kind of got off the ground. So happy to talk to you about that. And also the duration of flow. Especially in California, we have a lot of intermittency and like ephemeral streams, and how much does that actually affect the condition of the stream? And yes, also population, community, and habitat connectivity in BMP vegetation. I have no idea about terrestrial vegetation, so any help, anyone that wants to help is gladly accepted. Okay. So I think there's enough time left. I'm going to spend the last sort of couple of slides talking about what I learned in applied research, going from academia to applied research. As a disclaimer, all of my academic experience is not in the US. So this is just from my experience, so it maybe is not something that you agree with. But I think it's going to fuel some cool conversations. And obviously you can ask me any questions about it too. So first of all, the main differences. So both of these areas advance knowledge, which is cool. In academia, I see it more in my experience that it's more based on kind of theoretical or conceptual approaches. Whereas in applied research, we're actually addressing specific practical problems. But we have to scour the literature for that existing knowledge because we can't always make it ourselves. So that's kind of how the two kind of go together, I guess. So I feel like they're driven by different things. So in academia, it's driven more by curiosity. So in my experience, you know what area you want to look at, you already have some data, or you know what data you're going to be getting or how you're going to get it, and then you're like, oh, what question can I ask? That's not the case with applied research because you're actually focusing on a management problem, and that's what's driving it. So you need to figure out what the question is from that problem. And also that means you've got to figure out then what data you need, how you're going to get it, all of that stuff. That's kind of a whole project on its own, like just getting the data. But again, we're very dependent on other people, other agencies, academic partners, and the literature for that. So the audience is basically the academic community or your peers in academia. That's the same for us, but it goes a lot broader. So we involve industry professionals like agencies and stakeholders. And it's not just that they're the audience, they're actually involved from the very start of each project and all the way through. So we get all of these opinions and everything that we need to deal with. And we kind of have to meet with them on a frequent basis. And then, in terms of deliverables, so journal articles are the currency in academia. We publish those too, but we also produce technical reports, tools, recommendations. So I actually feel that the journal article is just the beginning, because then we actually use it as a tool to apply it to different projects and everything. Okay, so benefits and challenges. And this is the last slide. So I'm going to start off with the good. So the benefits of working in applied research is you get to solve real world problems. So that there is a real world problem. Then how do we solve it? You see your work applied in actual policy or implemented within the real world. So this is one of the permits that we deal with that some of our work is used for. We get to work alongside managers and policymakers, which is cool because that means we have a voice, which I think is important. And you also get to be creative, not just with the science itself, but how we actually translate it and how we actually use it for management and to solve management problems. So moving on to the challenges. So although we have, we get to solve real world problems, we've got to deal with the real world complexities, which includes both kind of the natural variability, but also the politics, which is sometimes the biggest barrier. It can be short-sighted. So managers tend to only really care about what's going on right in front of them and what they're regulated on at that moment, which can be quite frustrating. Like climate change is a big example of that. Like we're always trying to like you need to look at climate change. You need to just because you do this action now doesn't mean it's going to hold out for the future. So we need to look at climate change. So, but it means that we can kind of work with them to try and convince them. You're highly accountable. So if you implement something in the stream and it goes wrong, it's all your fault, unfortunately. I was even told on my first day at work that I will probably get sued. So that's nice. Yes, so you have to learn a new language. It's a completely different language than you learn in science. So I think it's hard enough, especially as a grad student, to try and communicate your science effectively and concisely. But then in applied research, you have to translate that to managers. So you've got engineers and everyone that understand you, and then you've got to say the reason is that you need to pay for this because this is what you want, kind of situation. And you can actually be quite limited in your curiosity. So so many questions come up that I want to answer, but I just don't have the time or the budget to be able to do that in each of the projects. But we try, at the end of the day, we're all scientists, so we try our best to kind of include what we want to do with research within our projects, but it's not always possible. So yeah, there are a couple of things that I thought kind of belonged in the middle because they were kind of double-edged sword. And the first one is it's highly interdisciplinary, which is great. You need that. You need engineers, you need hydrologists, you need biologists, you need toxicologists, but everyone at once is just too many cooks, and it can get very, very chaotic very, very quickly. So that can be quite difficult to manage, but it's a wonderful thing when it works well. And the next one is, and this might be just SQURP, so I can only speak for SQURP in this situation, but basically there's only one expert in SQURP within their field. So I'm the species modeling expert, which is great because I get to work on all these diverse projects and they do all these cool things. But if I get stuck on a really detailed problem, I have no one to ask. So kind of it can be quite frustrating, but that's why kind of collaboration for us is so important. We need to collaborate with agencies, with academics and all of that stuff to really get the best out of it. Okay, so that's everything. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I hope yeah, any questions? Hi.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. Super interesting. I have a quick question, which is, you mentioned when you were talking about your indices with the macroinvertebrates or endemic species,
yes.
That you had this baseline and then everything is negative from that. Where did that baseline come from? And if it's from some piece of literature, how much of your job involves wrangling information that's like trying to find where it came from, but people
Yeah.
use it because it's standardized at this point.
Okay, that's a really good question, because that's something that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the short answer is, so it's taken from a reference model in this particular situation, which is a published statewide model, and all it is using reference flow gauges and extrapolating to all the reaches within the state using like a machine learning technique. There's other ways that we've done that are quite similar. It's basically, we try not to call it reference because no one can agree on what reference is. Like there's no such thing. So if we call it baseline, then it just means like, what's it like? What the kind of, what would the flow be like without urbanization, or you know, without all these bulk dams and all of that kind of really obvious human impacts on it. Like that's all kind of standard now, and luckily I don't have to deal with it. I just use the data, but that took a lot of kind of persuading and like kind of negotiating, I guess, with all the agencies, because that's the kind of thing that no one's ever happy with. And it's not that they're like they don't trust the science. It's more like the wording that you have to use, and that's where like the whole politics side of everything kind of comes into it. You know, but yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks.
Kind of jumping off of that, how has working in this like, applied field of working with management in the US differed from in Europe? Like, is it kind of a similar process or easier?
For the management?
Yeah, or just kind of in general working in these like applied fields.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think it's difficult to answer because I've only worked like in applied here and then academic back in Europe. I can tell you that the work-life balance is different, and the general work culture is different. I think in Europe you tend to be left alone more, like to kind of work to your own like initiative, and then you would only go to your supervisor or whatever when you really get stuck. Whereas here I'm constantly having to give updates of what I've done, and like then that takes up a lot of time. Do you mean in terms of like how the management works and the policy?
Yeah,
or,
just curious about that.
So I think there seems to be a much more actually I'm going to say this and then take it back because of Brexit, but there was a kind of more established with the Water Framework Directive in the EU. It was much more established on how to collect the data and use the data and what to look for to look at the like stream condition. None of it worked. I looked at it recently and it's exactly the same. None of it was really improved at all. And I don't know what happens with the regulation in the UK now because of Brexit, because it was an EU law, and I haven't actually looked into like what happens. I think they stayed for a while, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying it. Hi.
So when you're like looking at the different like flow and temperature recommendations that managers should strive for, are you finding that a lot of times it essentially make it as close to like the pre-built up baseline, or are there any instances where you're finding that you're recommending something that's not at all what the natural flow regime or temperature regime would have been, and like you could kind of like improve even more? And I know it wouldn't actually be like an improvement, but like change it from what the natural state would be to benefit like the species of interest. Does that ever occur?
Yeah, do you mean the natural, like without any human impacts, or natural like current situation?
Like without any human impacts?
Yeah.
Like, are you essentially just always recommending make it as close to what it was before we built all these diversions and impervious surfaces and everything, or are there any like?
Yeah, that's kind of, that's what people used to do. Like, you know, when the whole kind of natural flow regime literature all came out like 20 years ago or whatever it was, and that's what the kind of ultimate aim was. But in these sorts of systems, there's just no way you're going to get that, you know. So we're just trying to get as close as possible. The other flip side of that is that oh no, this one's quite natural, quite nice. So we'll keep that one the way it is. And the other, the flip side of that is that some of these like modified systems are actually supporting novel habitat. So even though they may be like alien species or species that weren't there previously, but still kind of endemic, we actually need to still support those as well, because they're also important, and they're regulated on by the managers.
Hi. I have a couple questions, but so you mentioned you said, oh, you're probably gonna get sued, and that
It hasn't happened
a
yet.
little bit of time in this world actually before graduate school.
Oh yeah.
And that was definitely there were lots of lawsuits. People expected it, they anticipated it. So when you're putting together these models, like what kind of error can you tolerate? And like
Yeah.
how do you defend yourself, I guess, when they're like, no, that flow rate or that's wrong. That's wrong lower limit.
I mean, there's no like one answer to that. But it is, it's a really good question. It's one that we grapple with constantly. Like how much
happen a lot?
uncertainty, huh?
Like, do you get sued a lot or?
I haven't yet,
Yeah.
but I'm waiting.
But the group.
I think it happens, they never really attack the science, they just attack how it's used.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's never kind of something from our part, it's just, they just don't agree with the CCI threshold at 1.79, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and they can
It's
attack
maybe
that.
that's
It's
easier to
legitimate.
attack.
It's
right?
easier to attack that, yeah, exactly. But what I found, like, because we have everyone involved, like all the stakeholders and managers, they're involved right from the beginning. We tell them like what models we're going to do, and then, you know, we get a kind of agreement on that. We get their input on what, like the conceptual model, and then we show them like the results with the uncertainty. They kind of have more trust in it because they've had a voice in how to build it. Because I think that's kind of the end of the day, that's the most important thing, really. And it's good to actually show them like what the uncertainty actually means in the real world. Like, you know, 20% of the time it's not going to work. You know, if you've got a 0.8 uncertainty level or whatever.
Yeah.
So a bit of transparency, I think, is the best, and building trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question sort of from the perspective of like someone who is maybe going to be training people who want your job, right? So like if they want to like be the next Katie Irving, like there have been times when I'm not 100% sure whether to steer a student towards like learning R or learning Python or learning GIS. Is there a certain like direction that you see like agencies heading in terms of what are the types of like computational skills that they really should be building right now?
Yes, that's a good question. I use R, and you can use R for like everything, like GIS as well. I feel that that's the one most used, and I think that's the one that everyone should learn because it's so common, and it's a lot easier to get packages for what you need, and also like people publish their code now quite a lot of the time, so it's really easy. It's usually in R, so that makes it easy. I've like dabbled a bit in Python, but it hasn't come up that I've actually needed it. I think if someone wants to kind of get more into the GIS space, then that would be Python and GIS, because I think GraphGIS uses Python language. So I think, but in terms of like modeling, you can do quite a lot of spatial stuff, but if you just want to look at like modeling, I would go with R. But I guess it depends on what they want to do.
That's good.
But definitely R is the best, but also the worst. So
Hey. Second question, so sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I was gonna say, when you're talking to stakeholders and trying to like get people's opinions on that, what does that actual process look like for Squirk? Like, what is it? How are you engaging with the people in those communities?
Like what does it look like?
Yeah.
So yeah, we have, on every project, we have, so I'll start kind of from the beginning. So most of our projects are funded by our member agencies. So they're involved from the very beginning, as are the regulators that are involved. Usually the regulators will set new regulation or say they're going to in a few years. And so the agencies need to comply. And then we step in and go, this is how you do it. And then we also have a technical advisory group and a stakeholder advisory group. And they're involved, we invite them, and they're involved right from the beginning. So every like three or 4 months, we give them updates. And yeah.
Yeah, where do you how do you identify your stakeholders in that scenario? Is it just people who have already like member groups, but also yeah.
So I feel like I'm still new to California, so I can't identify them myself, but like my supervisor has worked there for 30 years and he just knows everyone and he knows who the best people are going to be. And then he just basically sends out like a bunch of emails to people to say like, are you interested? Or like, or anyone you know is interested. It's a bit of an open invitation, but we have to make sure that we're the right person too. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's actually not a question you can answer right now. But in the future, when we talk, because we're gonna be best buds, I'm really curious to see how the conversation shifts around invasives, especially within the riparian zone. There's a specific example that we have in Eugene where these western pond turtles started habitating this pond that wasn't there years ago. Now it's a pond. And there's a group of western pond turtles, they're native, and then there's a group of spotted turtles, invasive, but collectively the citizens of the neighborhood have been rioting against a ballpark that might be built there in the city. So
okay.
it's like it's this interesting mix of people that are like pro western pond turtle, pro all turtles, anti-city.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how it's creating this. It's like a community that's been created out of nowhere. No one understands why. I guess people have been released their turtles. I don't know. But it's shifting the way that we're thinking about turtles because now the invasive turtle is also going to get some of that restoration. So
the invasive ones?
Yeah, all of them. All of them
Yeah.
are gonna get what they need.
Yeah. So they have to find like what the invasives really hate and just put that in the restoration.
But we can also just let them do their thing. Because they're now.
That's how invasive they are, I guess.
They're not being, their invasivity or whatever is not affecting any other habitat because they're stuck there.
Right, yeah.
So it's either kill the turtles, move the turtles, or like let them thrive as much as they can.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I'm curious what you think.
But would they outcompete the natives though, even in that small area?
They're on the size of the river, so unless they start a war. or the pond, sorry. But that being said, I'm curious how your research on terrestrial plants, especially within the work you're gonna do, might shift or the common.
Yeah, to include invasive. I think that's a good idea. And yeah, I haven't done it yet. So but I think bringing it in, yeah.
Exactly.
See?
So
Yeah, best buddies. Any more questions?
I'll do one more.
One more.
I think I know the answer, but so
Okay.
you mentioned you're interested in doing life history and trait-based
Yes.
modeling, and I was curious in ecophysiology, there's a big push to understand how like phenotypic flexibility or developmental plasticity
Okay.
can change tolerances really rapidly to
Okay.
changing conditions. So I was wondering if people in your world are thinking about that at all. And I mean, really, where I think the agencies would be excited about it because it really changes the possible outcomes to be more positive.
Because of the
I think they're-
adaptations?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We don't kind of include anything like that, but I think they should. But I think you're right, yeah, Because
seen
then
a
we
lot
could
in,
have
like, the
alternatives or lesser drastic actions kind
Yeah.
of thing that are needed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sure.
there's a lot of good stuff in like the marine invertebrate world on that.
okay.
Um,
Oh, cool.
and how it really changes.
Yeah,
Projections.
okay, yeah, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, sure. But yeah, keep doing it so I can use it in my models, thank you. Cool.
We have one more question, sorry.
Yeah.
What's that, but you can
I'm gonna
go.
unmute myself and ask it. So I have a question about your like SDM limits and like, do you ever come across like threshold limits or like threshold effects in those limits?
What do you mean threshold effect, limits?
Like when you're doing like the specific response curves for your hybrid SDMs, and like working, like how do you like I guess do you ever see like really strong threshold limits in your responses as well of the SDMs of like after temperature hits a certain or flow hits a certain value, the species
okay.
population will just like drop dramatically.
Yeah, there are several of those, depending on like temperature is a really good one, like it hits a point and then it's just a no-go. But even like depth is that tends to be a normal distribution. It could be inverse. Like the one I showed you, I think, was seedling mortality. And that showed that like very wet conditions and very dry conditions were going to increase mortality like a load. It had to be kind of quite perfect. I don't know if you remember that one. Maybe I could just put it up quickly. So yeah, but we can't kind of derive what the threshold would be from those, but we can, here we go. But we can definitely see, like, you see what I mean? So that very dry conditions, so this is inundation, which is why it's negative. And then very wet conditions are going to increase mortality like a load, unless it's like down here, the depth is down here. But anyway, yeah, we can't derive thresholds from that, but we can definitely see kind of like strong responses, if that's what you were kind of getting at.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.